Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
To whomever may be listening, welcome to the end of the world. That's fucked up, huh? Hundreds of thousands of years of building up to this? It's beyond surreal. And to be honest, I don't think I've processed it. Processed it? That's funny. Like anyone can deal with this. Maybe the Bible thumpers, but I don't think so. Can you imagine? Spent their entire lives waiting to be beamed up above, to leave before all the shit hit the fan. No, I don't think anybody is coping well at all. Now, I don't know exactly when the riot started, but it wasn't too long after the first incident. Once the footage went viral of the sky opening, everything went to shit pretty quickly. Buildings cracked like eggs, spilling their contents into the open air, where some unimaginable current pulled everything into a void? A hole? I don't have a clue, and neither does anyone else, except maybe the poor souls who got to see it with their own eyes as they rose up into the sky. I guess we'll all know soon enough. So Leslie, my wife, took the kids over to her brother's place. He's one of those survival nuts with an underground bunker filled with equal parts food and ammunition. We argued for days about it, especially once some scientist guys and gals nailed down the date of the last day. The formula or algorithm or whatever they used went way over my head, but I caught the gist of it. The number of appearances, the rate at which they spread and widen, with a chance of some other stuff. Long story short, they determined today was the day. Today is the day. I begged her not to go, to spend what time we had left together, at home, in the place we'd built. But she was adamant, stubborn as always, insisting that it was the only way that it would be safe underground. Didn't matter that we had all seen the footage of subway cars ripped right from their tunnels, or that the government's bunkers were now nothing but gravel. In the end, I gave up. Our arguing was just scaring the kids more than they already were without our help. I hugged our boys tight, and I told them how much I loved them. How everything was going to be okay. And then I closed the door. Sorry, I just can't help it, you know? Seems I've cried more in the past 24 hours than I have in 20 years. They were my whole life, and I just let them go. I didn't tell them the whole truth. I didn't tell them that if they did somehow, by some miracle, survive, that I didn't want to be there. The truth is, if they make it through, I don't want to be a further drain on their resources. I won't take food out of my kids' mouths. Never. But that's not going to happen anyway. Let me just be clear about that. There's no last-minute miracle coming. Entire countries are gone. A hole opens above and gets wider and wider, while everything down to the topsoil goes up in a swirling column of near-black clouds. Before I left the house, I heard Australia was finally skinned, and Greenland is gone too. Like a lathe just shaving everything off the surface of the earth, leaving nothing but dirt and rock. As to why, who knows or cares at this point? Alien terraforming, lizard people, vast government conspiracies, God's righteous judgment, Bill Gates, Democrats. I've heard it all in the last few weeks, and it all doesn't matter. And even if we knew, what difference would it make? I'm still going to die today, along with everyone else. Damn, I've run out of beer. I've been steadily drinking since Leslie left. Why not? I've never been much for it, but today of all days, it's pretty nice. My nerves are calm at least. The clouds are getting thicker by the minute. No real sunlight to speak of, but it's all right. I'm not sure if I'm fuzzy-headed from the drinking or from watching the clouds move. They're kind of hypnotic, I guess. They curl around each other, intertwine like strings, then tear apart, then meet again, only to start to dance over. It would be a beautiful thing under different circumstances. Christ, I've never heard a thunderclap like that. I felt it in my bones, felt my heart rattle in my chest. I'm surprised there's not a mushroom cloud on the horizon. Well, that's how I always imagined the end, you know. My father used to tell me stories about drills they had to perform in school when he was growing up. The siren would go off, the sound sawing through the afternoon air. Then they'd have to crawl under their desks and put their little hands over their heads and wait for the end. And now my sons do something similar, preparing for the chance that some asshole with an AR-15 kicks in their classroom door. I get it now. I don't think I ever got it then, but yeah, I get it now. I'm not crawling underneath a desk, though. I'm just going to sit right here on my front porch and watch the sky open for me. No running, no hiding. It is what it is. I can see shapes leaving the ground in the distance. Malformed shadows rising in the air and up into whatever lies beyond the opening. Could be trees, might be houses. Our nearest neighbors live out that way, Jan and Harold. They came over to the house often to chat and see the boys. They never could have kids of their own, so I guess they liked being around mine. They didn't know how lucky they were. I know that sounds awful, and I feel awful saying it, but they didn't have to explain this impossible situation to a child. Didn't have to tell them that they wouldn't. I don't think I can do this. I thought I was strong enough to watch it creep towards me, but I can't. It's like watching the world's slowest bullet coming at you in a long, doorless hall. There's no room to dive out of the way, no doors to duck behind. I can see people going up now. The flailing limbs are easy to make out. I don't know if I'm imagining their screams or if I'm actually hearing them. I've changed my mind. I think I'm glad they didn't stay. At least they won't see it coming. The edges are getting clearer. Not clean cut like it was carved into the sky. Nothing as obvious as that, but there's definition there. A boundary between worlds. I don't know if worlds is right, but it leads somewhere else. Some unimaginable place. Maybe even into the vacuum of space. Nobody knows. Screaming, yes. The screaming is closer. Can you hear it? The sound warps in the wind, back and forth like waves. Sounds closer than it is. I brought out my pistol with me. I just feel safer with it here. It won't stop what's coming, of course, but it will stop me. I just want to see inside before I go. See if there's something in there. And if I can't stick it out, well, I have another option. It was my father's pistol. He's long dead now, and I'm glad he didn't live to see this. Glad I don't have to see the smug satisfaction on his face. He already had a crazy streak in him, and this just would have made it so much worse. He went slow, Alzheimer's and dementia. I don't know if it was growing up with the threat of nuclear annihilation or what, but he was always preoccupied with the end of times. It just got worse as he got worse, ranting and raving about the apocalypse until the nurses would have to sedate him. One time, He made me hide in a closet for most of a day to keep me safe from some terrible end. When Mom got home, she was more pissed off than I'd ever seen her before. For the rest of that summer, I stayed with my aunt while Mom was at work. Dad wasn't working by that point, just drawing disability checks from the government. He used to work, had multiple jobs in fact, but he'd always lose them in the end. As soon as one of his bad days would happen, he'd be let go. He could never keep the crazy to himself, like he always felt the need to spread it around. Yeah, it's getting colder out here. Ambient temperature drops as the hole approaches, common knowledge by this point. Like when you open your front door in winter and all the heat rushes out of the room. Exactly like that, actually. The clouds are almost to the ground now. I can imagine them tearing into the earth like fingers, pulling up handfuls to be drawn up into the absence there. Anyway, sorry I got caught up in the moment. What was I saying? Oh yeah, Dad. He bust into my room one morning when the sun was just a glint on the horizon, maybe an hour after my mom had left for the day. He said I had to get somewhere safe. I think I nodded to him, still all bleary-eyed and mostly asleep. He scooped me up and carried me down the hall. When we got to the linen closet, he quickly opened it and sat me within. I don't remember much about the early hours, but I do remember pulling the folded sheet down from the shelf, wrapping myself up and falling back to sleep. When I woke again, light was shining underneath the door. I banged on the wood with my fists, screamed until I was hoarse, and my throat was raw, but Dad never showed up. I was locked up for hours, my stomach growling loud enough to echo in the closet. I pissed in the corner like an untrained puppy. When my mom came home, she found my dad standing in the front yard, pistol in one hand and beer in the other, staring up at the sky. My dad spent the next 5 years or so instilling the dread of the apocalypse into me. He'd watch these televangelists on TV, then give me a lesson on everything they had said when the show ended. He even sent money to those con artists. Some days, we'd be wondering if we could pay the rent, but we didn't have to worry about some asshole preacher having the money to fill his private jet, now did we? Speculation about the identity of the Antichrist was a favorite of his. The carousel included Mikhail Gorbachev, Ronald Reagan, and eventually Saddam Hussein. I lived with the fear that any day the tribulation would begin, and I'd be forced to make the decision to either accept the mark of the beast or die of starvation. The mark was always different too. Barcode tattoos, credit cards, RFI tags implanted in your skin, vaccines. I'm glad I'm an only child, so no one else had to deal with Dad's lunacy. The day of my wedding, my mom pulled me aside to tell me that Leslie and I would never work because we were both only children. She said we would be too stubborn to stay together. It's crazy what you think about at the end. What was that? It sounds like knocking, pounding. Maybe trees bouncing off of each other on the way up? I can't tell from here. All the debris just looks like shadows shooting into the sky. Maybe Dad was right. Maybe this is biblical and it just doesn't look the way everyone expected it to look. No heavenly light piercing through the clouds or people just disappearing or whatever else Hollywood has come up with. Maybe it's just a celestial vacuum cleaner sucking up everything into the sky. Don't know why we'd need all this crap up in heaven, but who am I to question the divine plan? The sky is... I don't know how to describe it. What color to name it? Gray just isn't enough, and silver would probably make you think that it's shiny when it isn't. It's like the dull gunmetal color of Dad's pistol. The clouds are gyring around the nearest hole, moving much slower than you'd think. Everything is slow. Has been slow for months. Time's different when you have all the time in the world. I was laid off 9 months ago. That isn't entirely true, I guess. I was fired, ashamed as I am to admit it. I had just found out about the holes opening in the sky, and I tried to tell people, but they just wouldn't listen. My boss overheard me, and we got into it, and I took a swing at him. Not my proudest moment, but the son of a bitch just wouldn't listen. Guess I got the last laugh, though, huh? But I don't feel like laughing. Dad's probably laughing wherever he is. Is this funny, old man? You got what you wanted? Everything is going to shit and God's calling us all home. And what is that goddamn banging sound? Oh, shit, man. It's actually pretty funny. Here I am, laughing and raving just like the bastard. Here it comes, like it's stretching to meet me. The clouds are splitting in a jagged line and coming this way. Like the hole just got too wide and just split. Jesus, listen to that wind howl. Like a goddamn freight train. I thought I was ready. I really did, but I'm scared. I don't think I want to see what's in there anymore. I could end it here. Just do it and get it over with. It'd be so easy. But what if I'm wrong? I'm not saying it's heaven up there, but it might be something. It could be a paradise, a fresh start for the human race. Goddamn Oz, for fuck's sake. Just anything but here. I'm not going to look. I'll let it take me, but I'm not looking. But I have to look. It doesn't make any sense. There's no light coming, but there's reflections and things, and dear Christ, what are they? They're voices. Voices like squeaking hinges. What is... Leslie? What are you doing? Take the voice back. Back where? No! Don't look at it! What? At the hole! Don't look at it! Get them away from here! I swear to God I'll shoot! I'd rather put you all down easy than to have you see what's happening! Don't you get it? Don't you fucking get it? I'll do it! Please don't make me! No! There. It's done. Now they won't see. They never have to see. They're safe now. Jesus Christ. What? Where did it go?
The day was unseasonably warm for Avon, Maine. My brother, Zach, and I had been working all day getting the lawn cut and chores done so we could help Serena with the pool shed off the side of the house. We all loved Halloween and wanted to do something great this year, so we decided to turn the shed into a haunted house. Plastic skeletons and paper ghosts littered outside, and a sign proclaiming, "Trespassers will be eaten." Unfortunately, as fun as that was, it was also true. We took extra precautions and double-chained the bulkhead doors to the cellar, but we couldn't be responsible for those lost. It's pretty unlikely that it would happen, but Captain Bubbles would eat the children in a heartbeat. The added effect of having an actual ghoul bang on the doors from down below would be a bonus to his credit. Even Uncle Bob was getting into the spirit, as much as a ghost can, I suppose. He's been walking around, talking about back when kids didn't need parents to trick or treat, and how most of the treats used to be homemade. Nobody worried about being poisoned or stabbed with a razor blade when biting into a red delicious. It's pretty cool to hear about how things used to be when holes in a bedsheet were a popular costume, but I'm starting to get concerned about our beer supply. I can't tell you for sure, but I think the fact that it's Halloween makes his form more solid. He almost looks like he did when he was alive, and isn't floating around all over the place. He also isn't leaving a beer trail on the ground everywhere he goes. I could be wrong, but he might even be a little drunk. Something to do with the Veil of the Dead and all that. Finally, we were close to being finished. Kids would come in, and Zach would jump out dressed as a roast turkey and scare them. They could get some punch and candy and be on their way out the back door. Serena was dressed as a witch, donning a purple hat with entirely too much glitter, and was tasked with handing out the treats. I would be the one to lead them out. My costume was the best. Twice, Zach asked why I was dressed like Gomez Adams, so I just learned to ignore it. By the way, I was dressed as Edgar Allan Poe. Serena went back outside to check on the decorations one last time, and I got a great idea. I went over to the side of the woodpile and hurried over to Zach and Uncle Bob. All right, when she comes back in, don't make any noise. On my signal, jump out and scare the hell out of her.
Sounds good, man. I haven't heard her scream since we were kids. And I threw that spider in her hair.
Laughed Zach.
I think that she was the one that threw the spider in your hair. And that was also you screaming.
Chuckled Bob. Before Zach had a chance to defend himself, the door opened up again and I silenced them both. She began walking around with a confused look, and when she came close, I silently counted off my hand. 1, 2, 3 was all I could get out. The ground beneath us quickly opened up, pulling the three of us down with it. We landed on soft dirt and a shallow pool of water, thankfully, and Serena began to call out. Don't come near it, I yelled. You could end up falling in too. Just go get help from the fire department.
But they won't come down here anymore, since Zach burned down the family of scarecrows for fun.
She replied. Oh, damn it, that's right. Police are out. I guess maybe an ambulance? Fuck it, go get Melvin and Sheena, I yelled back.
All right, I'll be back soon. Just hang on, guys.
She yelled. The sound of the chains rustled, and the cellar door slammed hard. Serena screamed for a moment. Then it was silent once more.
That ghoul of yours sure is priceless,
said Uncle Bob.
Bob, why are you still down there? Can't you fly?
Asked Zach.
Normally, but I think I'm too full of beer. I ain't felt this alive since I died.
Zach, your arm, I said, looking over in horror. It snapped between the wrist and elbow, and the bone was sticking clean through, dangling loose skin. In a grotesque show, he pulled it off, meat and skin snapping apart like a rubber band, and then tossed it aside. What the hell, man? What did you just do?
Oh, relax. None of this is canon.
He chuckled, pushing his real arm through the sleeve. All right, well, we're stuck in a sinkhole. What do you guys think we should do? I asked.
It's Halloween. There's only one thing we can do. Ghost stories,
said Bob, nodding matter-of-factly. So, we huddled together in a circle, sitting in the soggy water, and Zach began to speak.
All right. I got one that'll really knock your socks off. I call it the Circle of Death.
Zach opened his eyes. The room was blurred, and the light coming in through the window was blinding. He fumbled around the table for his lighter. Nothing like a morning pre-roll to shake the cobwebs off. He claimed his prize and pulled a slightly crumpled joint from his shirt pocket. After sparking it up and taking a few deep puffs, he began to look around the room.
What the hell happened here? Hey, Matt! Matty?
The room was in complete disarray. Photos knocked from the wall, chairs splintered and strewn about. Definite signs a struggle had taken place. No answer from Matt. Zach decided to check for him upstairs.
Oh, shit.
A huge pool of blood lay at the foot of the stairs. How many people had contributed to this lake? There was no choice but to walk through it. Crimson footprints marked each step going up. He wasn't the first to come through here. He raced up the stairs and over to Matt's door, slamming his massive frame into it. He tore through it like construction paper. There was no resistance whatsoever, and he nearly crashed into the opposing wall. Matt and Serena were startled awake. "What the hell, Zach? You're fixing that door."
You're all right? Oh, thanks, sweet baby Jesus. I thought you guys were goners. And the door was like that when I got here. And also, the doors are not the only problem.
Serena yawned loudly and spoke up.
Slow down, little buddy. What do you mean, not the only problem?
There's a puddle of blood at the bottom of the stairs big enough to swim in. Guys, I think we gotta get out of here.
Slow down, Zach. Let's go check it out. Can you give us a minute?
Hell no, man. I'm not going out there alone. Have you ever seen those movies?
Fine. Whatever. Just close your eyes, would you? Matt gave the nod to Serena as Zach closed his eyes. They both got up and got dressed as quickly as they could. All right, you're good.
Let's get out of here.
The three of them emerged from the room. Zach is the largest lead in the pack.
Coast is clear, guys. Let's head out.
They hastily crept down the hallway and reached the top of the stairs.
Holy shit, you weren't kidding. Surprised the ducks haven't moved in,
said Serena. There's someone or something that is probably going to kill us if it finds us. And you're talking about ducks? Real nice, Serena. Real nice.
Ladies first.
Serena giggled as she pushed past the brothers and made her way down the stairs. Zach and Matt stared dazed for a moment before making their way down. Serena reached the bottom and turned up to say something to them. Her words never made their mark, however. Blood erupted from her neck and her head was pulled back. An invisible blade carved back and forth as her head was jerked around violently. After a few gruesome moments, the blade cut clean through the spine, and her body fell limp. The head was suspended in midair, raining blood down as it fed the already swollen puddle. Zach and Matt turned and ran back upstairs. Uncle Bob's room seemed like the best option. It also had the only escape on the second floor. They stormed into his room and slammed the door behind them. Zach began stacking furniture in front of the door as Matt looked around for anything to defend themselves with. He approached the door that randomly led outside and was puzzled by what he saw. There, in the door, were dozens of tally marks. 69 to be exact. All scratched into the wood. Zach, what is happening? Serena, She's dead. Zach, what in the fuck is happening? His heart pumped loudly in his ears. Zach! Matt turned to look at his brother. Zach stood with his shoulder pressed against a dresser he had dragged in front of the door. A fog rolled off his body, much like dry ice. Matt got closer and felt the warmth drain from his face. Zach was covered in ice, an expression of fear frozen on his face. An eerie creak began from the door. Matt began taking steps back. 1 step, 2 steps. The creaking grew louder. 3 steps. Then bang! The door and makeshift barricade, along with his brother, shattered into a million icy shards. Matt backed up against the door leading to the roof. Tears stung the spots on his cheeks from where the ice had cut into him. As the ice settled, he saw a figure looking in the doorway. It was almost human, but distorted and much too large. It slowly crept forward. Matt shook with fear. He felt for the knob to try and make his escape, but it wasn't there. He turned to look for it, but it was as if there had never been one at all. He turned back to face the creature. It was closer now, less than a moment at this rate. For some odd reason, this all felt so familiar. The fear gradually evaporated, leaving another feeling in its place. Déjà vu. With each step the creature took, it became more and more clear. This had all happened before, and it would all happen again. Matt retrieved his pocket knife and opened it. He turned to face the door again and etched a line, crossing the last 4 marks. Guess this makes 70. He felt a strong, clawed hand on his shoulder and hot breath on his neck. He closed his eyes and placed the knife back in his pocket. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Zach finished his story, and we could all hear the sound of something being scraped in the distance.
Serena?
Zach yelled. There was no reply. The scratching continued, but we just resumed our stories. That was actually pretty good, Zach, I admitted.
Thanks. I used that time I almost died in the old folks' home as inspiration. Evil place.
Well, I've been telling you kids history all night. I suppose one more story couldn't hurt. I don't really got a name for it. Most folks didn't give titles to their stories back then, but I guess you could call it The Gathering of the Dead. It's been pretty quiet around here for the past few years, other than the occasional spirit passing through. The house was built in 1820 and many generations have come and gone. In old times, people didn't leave home much, so most died at home and were buried nearby. Oftentimes, the grave markers were forgotten or lost track of over time. Who knows how many souls you disturb by just mowing the lawn? I have met up with probably a dozen spirits here. Some are silent and just whisk around, not wanting to be seen. Others are loud with sounds or actions, trying to rid the place of the living that disturb them. There are also child spirits, still playful and impish even in death. I guess they don't know the scope of what happened to them. Halloween seems to be an active time for the spirits. They all come out at once, so you get a variety of activities. A few years back, I watched the news and heard a baby crying upstairs. I knew there were no living people or animals in the house, but I had to look. I found nothing up there, but heard a ruckus downstairs. I came down and the kitchen table had been moved to the center of the room. The spare leaf had been put in the center to make it bigger, and every chair and stool in the house were gathered around it, even my damn recliner. I decided that if they were going to have a gathering, I should probably go out on the town for the night and let them have at it. It was nearly 7 on a Friday night, so the local bar was starting to get a crowd. Mind you, it's a small town, so the crowd consists of 20 people. The entertainment was just a pool table, some drunk characters, a jukebox, and later on some drunks trying to sing karaoke. I'm pretty quiet, so I just got a pitcher of beer and took it to an empty booth on the side. I often went there to kick ass in pool tournaments, but tonight there were just a bunch of young punks playing that didn't even know what end of the table to break from. After half my pitcher was gone, an old friend, Eileen, came in. She got herself a ginger ale at the bar, came back, and sat in my booth.
What brings you down off the hill?
She asked. I proceeded to tell her about what had happened to the house. She was quite interested because she had messed around with the spirit world for quite some time. Rumors had long circulated in town that she was a witch. We had dated some when we were younger. A few good times in the sack, but never really went beyond that. She wanted to come back to the house with me with hopes of meeting some ghosts. I finished my pitcher and we went to my car. Drinking and driving wasn't a big thing back then. Cops were only involved when things went bad. Besides, you were responsible for your actions and no one else butted into your business. I sure do miss those times. Once, a few friends and I slow-rolled my van into someone's backyard in town beside the cemetery. We fired the beer cans into the bushes and 3 friends took off on foot. The county sheriff's deputy eventually came around, but he didn't even get out of his car. He shined his spotlight on the upside-down van and asked if anyone got hurt and said, "Get it out of there, boys." We walked the 5 miles home, getting back about midnight. The next day we went back with my brother and his Impala and pushed the van upright by hand and dragged it home with his car. Eileen and I got back to the house. There was a glow coming from the kitchen windows. I know that I hadn't left anything turned on. I unlocked the front door and we went inside. The chairs were still around the table with a faint glow. There was a low humming sound like they were all chanting together slowly. Eileen had gone over and knelt beside the recliner to listen to their low chant. I reached for the light switch beside the door, but nothing happened when I flicked it on. I decided to go back to the car and get my flashlight. When I returned, Eileen met me outside the door.
It's kinda weird.
She said.
It's like they have a seance to keep the living out of the house.
Well, they better learn that this is my house now, I said. I went to the bulkhead in the shed and down into the cellar. Sure enough, the main had been switched off in the power panel. I turned it back on and heard quite a commotion on the floor above. I went back out front and saw that the kitchen light was now on. Eileen and I went back inside and were surprised that the table and chairs were all back in their places, and the spare leaf was out of the table. Eileen talked me into having our little seance. I agreed on the condition that I could have a beer at the same time. She lit a couple of candles, turned the lights off, and did her low chants. After 10 minutes, she was just finishing up when a coffee cup fell out of the cupboard and smashed onto the floor. She said that the spirits were trying one last attempt to scare us off. She finished her last chant and blew out the candles. I turned the light back on, and she said that the spirits shouldn't bother too much anymore, but there might be a stray one now and then. She said she had one last chant to protect me, so I said okay.
Spirits of the house, let this man be. I command you this promise to keep. For all his time, Let him sleep.
I said, well, then sleep sounds like a good idea. She agreed and asked if she could crash on the couch. I said, of course, and the night was quiet after that. There hasn't been much spirit activity here since that night.
Zach and I slowly looked at each other when he was done speaking. Our eyes were wide, and we locked sight. We both screamed, hugging each other in a mock show of terror.
I hate to say it, but that was about as lame as soggy toast, Uncle Bob.
Zach said. Yeah, it was good, but it wasn't all that scary, I said. Just as the words left my lips, we could hear things rapidly moving around the house. There were murmurs, like people talking and laughing, and I swear, I could hear a baby crying.
Oh, don't mind them. They're just having their annual get-together. You go ahead and tell your spooky tale, Matt.
He said with a chuckle. All right, well, I guess it's my turn now. I call it Franken-Zach. The sun had set not too long ago, and darkness overtook the cemetery. Everything was grainy and in black and white, as color hadn't been invented yet. Not a single soul, living or dead, could be heard. Only the sound of the shovel scraping into the dirt, again and again. Damn it, bro. Why did you have to try and teach that moose remedial Spanish? Matt hissed to himself. He continued to dig until he hit the casket. Brushing the dirt aside, he lifted the heavy 3-foot coffin out of the hole and onto the grass above. Letting out a sigh, he climbed out and brought it over to the truck, tossing it unceremoniously in the bed. And with that, he left and went back to the house. After lugging the coffin up the stairs and onto the roof of the pool shed outside of Uncle Bob's room, Matt kicked off the top, revealing a small figure inside. It was a great thing the circus was in town last week. Being such a small population, deaths were scarce and fresh bodies were hard to come by. The lion went feral that day by a stroke of luck. The lion tamer whipped the creature one too many times, and the clown who stood near it had his legs ripped to shreds. Unfortunately, he was also a little person. But beggars can't be choosers. He glanced at Zach's ruined body once more before cutting open the little man's skull. Matt tugged the brain out, making a wet pop as the stem detached, then tossed it aside. Taking Zach's brain, he shoved it inside, then closed it up. The legs were a problem, so he swapped them around too.
Wait, this is like some next-level surgeon stuff you're talking about here. How are you gonna just swap him out like it's a Mr. Potato Head?
Asked Zach. Will you be quiet? Just don't worry about it, I shot back. Now, where was I? So, the body and brain are finally together. Matt continued his dark work and raised the table. It was only a couple of feet up, as he didn't have an actual lab to work with. But he stepped back and waited. Thunder had been promised tonight in the forecast, and while the sky was full of clouds, they continued to drift on by in the peaceful night. Are you kidding me? Matt yelled. I spent all day at a freaking circus tent dealing with other people's terrible children, subtly shooting a lion in the ass with a pellet pistol, and dug up a tiny clown's body for the weather to be bad? No, you're going to give me lightning, like you promised, goddammit! No sooner did he say the words than a bolt of lightning blasted out of nowhere. Matt fell on his ass and quickly got up to put out the small fires around the roof. Heat streamed off the body before him, and slowly the hands started twitching. The torso began to rise as its eyes opened to stare down at Matt. Matt nearly jumped out of his skin, moaning, seeing the thing before him. It worked! I can't believe it! I mean, it's alive! It's alive! The small frame sat on the edge of the table with its freakishly long Zach legs, then stood up. Altogether, it was about the size of a normal person, but the combination looked so terribly wrong. Before Matt could react, it stumbled forward and fell off the roof. Damn it! I guess I better go get him. Matt ran back into the house and out the door to the shed, but it was already gone. The creature still had Zach's brain and personality, but he was severely dumbed down. He made it to the edge of Phillips and happened upon a little girl. She was playing with her dolly and seeing the creature. She walked over and offered up her prized possession. Frank and Zach wasted no time taking it, booting her into a well. Laughing, he continued toward the main street. Frank and Zach didn't mind it much as he went to the cake shop. Breaking the display window, he devoured as many confections as possible. People saw him emerge from the shadows and began screaming in horror. Ah! His stomach was much smaller than he remembered, equating to about half a cake. Stuffed full of a few pieces, he ran toward the apartment complex that housed a few of the town's local whores. Sasha had just stepped out of the shower after another customer had left. She sat on the bed, not bothering to put any clothes on, and began brushing her long brunette hair. She lifted a mirror to do her makeup and screamed, seeing his horrible burnt clown face in the mirror. Zach slowly stumbled through the door, quietly making his way over to her room. She quickly backed up as she struggled to understand how such a little body could have such long ass legs. It was true that Zach was a part Sasquatch, but she never had time to put the two together. Friend, he said, looking over her naked body. His high-pitched voice would be hilarious under normal circumstances. He reached into his back pocket to pull out what cash he had in his wallet and tossed a couple $100 toward her. The two proceeded to get busy, with her not being one to turn down cash. Afterward, while smoking a joint, she began to ask him questions like, "Am I pretty? And are you seeing someone else?" His instincts fired on all cylinders, and he made to leave as fast as possible. She wasn't having it, though, and wrapped her arms around him, trying to pull him back. Like a cornered animal, Frank and Zach lashed out, smashing her head to the bed. His tiny hands wrapped around her throat, and as much as she scratched, slapped, and almost threw him off, she finally lay still. "Bad lady!" he yelled in his high-pitched tone. He left her dead body there as he took to the streets, heading to the one place where he knew he would be safe. Unfortunately, word around town had spread, and the townspeople began gathering anything they could find as weapons and carried torches through the streets. Frank and Zach ran as fast as his freakishly long legs could carry him, which was pretty fast. And finally, up ahead, his haven came into view. It was the Bull, the local pizza place that Serena used to work at. Not wasting a second, he smashed through the door and struggled to push tables up against it. The two guys inside were understandably confused when they saw this thing appear inside their establishment. They went up to tell him off, and he began to growl at them. They laughed as his little arms couldn't quite reach them. Frank and Zach gave mighty screams of anger, but they were to no avail. Matt, knowing his brother's eating habits, went to the bull as well. The door was locked, but he knew he was in there. He also knew that in about 5 minutes, there would be an angry mob there as well, and he needed to hurry. He went around the back, and the service entrance was open. Running through the kitchen, he came upon the sight of the two bullies messing with his brother. Anger grew hot in his chest, and Matt threw a can of tomato sauce at one of their heads. Ugh! Pop! The can exploded in a mess of red, covering not only the cashier, but also his brother. He dropped to the ground like a stone, and the other man ran out the back. "You okay, bro?" Matt asked.
"Zach ugly. Zach monster,"
he said sadly. "It's okay, buddy. Maddie's here," he said, hugging him. Suddenly, the doors began to bang. Outside, they could hear the angry shouts of the mob as they forced their way in. The tables were pushed from their positions and the door slowly opened, letting in a stream of people. "There he is! It's the monster! It needs to die!" they all screamed in tandem. They began to make their way forward, knives and other awful weapons raised, and Matt put himself between them. "He's not a monster, he's my brother, and you people are gonna leave him alone. You're the real monsters here, all of you with your axes and your fire. Zach is a saint compared to you all." The crowd momentarily stopped pursuing and seemed to reflect upon Matt's words. Just as he thought they were going to drop their weapons and go home, someone screamed, "Kill him anyway!" Out from the crowd came Molotov cocktails, fire exploding out with them. Matt tried to pull his brother with him to the back door, but he spoke in a high-pitched voice.
"Go, bro, go! Leave Zach here!"
Matt tried to convince him to come, to talk him out of it. But the fire was raging, and there was no reasoning with him. And with a final shove that was hilariously weaker than it should have been, Matt watched on, completely distraught, as his only brother disappeared into the flames. The end.
Well, that was a depressing story,
said Zach.
Like, you didn't even try to get me out of there. You just let me burn.
Yeah, well, that's what you get for playing with the wildlife,
Uncle Bob replied. The scratching had persisted up to this point, but was becoming even louder. We looked up at each other with confused expressions, when finally, the wall behind Bob began to open up.
Oh, shit. It's Mr. Bubbles,
said Zach. The ghoul we had trapped in the basement finally found a way to us. Blood already coated its claws and face, and I think I knew why, from the sparkling purple witch hat atop its head. A flurry of motion proceeded to disembowel, tearing us apart. Finally, after all this time, he got to feast on our flesh, and when satisfied, he smiled and walked back to the hole he had dug. Happy Halloween, he exclaimed as he lay down and entered the most peaceful sleep of its undeath.
I wasn't sure what I was more surprised to discover. The ragged hole in my backyard, or the man stuck in it. The hole was a crack about 8 feet long and maybe 2 feet thick at its widest point. It looked as if the earth had just pulled apart, separating like a wet paper towel. It had not been there yesterday. I'm certain I would have noticed. Likewise, I would have noticed a person in my yard, especially one struggling to escape a hole. Not that he was struggling when I found him. By then, he was just slumped over, looking resigned to being trapped from the waist down in a hole forever. Honestly, I was a little afraid that he was dead at first, but he lifted his head when he heard my footsteps approaching. "Hey, do you need help?" I called, sort of a stupid opener. What was he going to say? "No, I like it fine in this hole, thanks." Obviously, he needed help. "Yeah, I'm kinda stuck," he said. We were both really nailing it on the scintillating conversation. "So, what happened?" I asked, drawing closer. I eyed the ground warily. I wasn't sure what caused the crack, and I didn't want to be too close to it if it suddenly expanded. "I was hiking around in the woods." He waved a hand vaguely in the direction of the forest that backed onto my property. "Got lost, came out here, thought I was saved. Then, bam! Ground fell out from underneath my feet and I tumbled in here. Must have been a sinkhole or something. My legs twisted and I can't get any leverage. I yelled for a while, but your house is a pretty good distance off that way, so I was just conserving my energy for a bit, figuring out a new plan." He grinned wryly. "I hadn't really come up with one, so I'm glad you came along." He was talking a pretty good game, but I could see from the sweat on his pale skin that he wasn't doing so well. I thought about going back to the house for some sort of tool, but I wasn't sure what would work for this. A winch, maybe, but I didn't have one of those. Maybe just a length of rope. Honestly, I couldn't think of anything that would work better than just grabbing him under the arms and hauling him up. To do that, though, I was going to have to straddle the hole in the ground. It wasn't a hard step physically. The crack was slightly less than shoulder width, but I had no idea how deep it went or when it might spread larger again. It had opened up between one step and the next the first time. What would happen if it shifted again when I had a leg on the other side? I knew exactly what would happen. I'd fall screaming into the darkness below, along with my new friend. I could picture it with perfect clarity, and I didn't care for the image at all. I could hardly leave the guy stranded in a hole, though, and delaying wasn't going to help things along. So I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped across the crack. "I'm gonna grab you under the shoulders," I told the stranger, bending down. "I'll lift up while you push however you..." Whew. Oh, that's some stink coming up from there. "Oh yeah, that sulfur stink. I finally stopped smelling it. Figure my nose shut down after the first few hours. Oh, it's something else though. Honestly, I was real worried I was suspended over your septic system or something." "Not this far back," I assured him. "But yeah, there's sure something down there. Whoa." I took shallow breaths to avoid taking in too much of the warm, stench-laden air. "Come on, let's get you out of there. On 3. 1, 2, 3. I pulled as hard as I could. The stranger scrabbled at the broken edges of the dirt with his hands and twisted his hips back and forth, trying to rotate to a position of greater freedom. I was starting to see spots when suddenly, with a cry that was half pain and half relief, the man slid free of the earth's grasp. I deposited him, none too gently, on the ground, hopping clear of the hole to make sure I didn't end up in the predicament I'd just freed him from. "Man, you were really in there. How are you doing?" I could see the answer with my own eyes. His right leg was twisted, not fully backward or anything, but definitely further than it ought to go. He didn't seem to be moving either leg as he lay there panting. He reached his hands down to his legs and felt around, as if confirming they were still there. "Still got feeling," he said. Gotta say, I was a bit worried about that. They've been kind of folded up in there for a bit. He braced himself on his elbows and rolled up to a half-kneeling position. I think I can't... His right leg gave out as he tried to put weight on it, spilling him back onto the ground. I hurried to his side and crouched next to him, offering him support and stability. Come on, let's get you back on your pins. See if you can walk this off a bit. With my help, he regained his feet. His left leg supported his weight without issue, but I felt him halfway collapse onto me as he tested his right leg again. I looked over to see him gritting his teeth, holding back the pain. Hey, it's all right. Lean on me, I told him. Come on. We'll get you back to the house. With him hanging off of my shoulder, I made my way back across the yard toward my house. I could tell that he was fading as we went, because he kept putting more and more of his weight on me. That was basically fine until about halfway across the yard when suddenly he got heavy. Not like leaning a bit harder heavy, like doubled his weight heavy. I stumbled, dropping to one knee. Without me to lean on, the stranger fell forward. He was pretty clearly unconscious as he fell past, but that wasn't what grabbed my attention. I was more focused on how red his skin had gotten, and the two jet black horns jutting out of his forehead. He definitely hadn't had those before. It's the kind of thing that catches the eye. The vision, if that's what it was, only lasted for the split second while he was toppling to the ground. As soon as he hit, he let out a moan of pain, and just like that, he was back to normal. Sorry, I exclaimed, getting him upright again. His weight was back to normal along with the rest of him. I brushed my hand against his forehead as I was getting his arms settled around my shoulders, and I felt nothing but skin. By all appearances, he was a regular person. I knew what I'd seen, though. Impossible though it was. He'd had the visage of a demon. The rest of the way back to the house, I kept stealing glances at him, trying to see through his disguise again. Try as I might, though, I could see nothing but the human. I could almost believe that he was a person, that I'd imagined it, but it all fit too neatly. I'd believed his story, odd though it was. I'd accepted that he was just a lost hiker who had happened onto my property just as a surprise sinkhole that stank of sulfur opened beneath him, trapping him. It was a crazy story, but there he was in the hole, and there didn't seem to be any better explanation since demons weren't real. But if demons were real, then it was really straining credulity to ask me to believe that he wasn't one who had just crawled up from hell. And what I had seen in that fleeting moment was definitely a demon. I still walked him into my house, though. I helped him limp up the steps of the back deck. I got him to the guest room and sat him down on the bed. I told him to make himself comfortable, and I went to get him some water while I tried to figure out exactly what on earth I was doing. On the face of it, inviting a demon into my house seemed like a great way to get my face ripped off. It was pretty hard to picture this guy as a threat, though. One of his legs wasn't working, and he was absolutely exhausted on top of it. The more I thought about it, the more likely it seemed that the reason his disguise had slipped was that he had passed out on the way to the house. If he couldn't even walk across the yard, what kind of threat could he really pose? Anyway, demons weren't the only thing in hell. Souls got cast down there on the regular, according to the church crowd. You were supposed to get wings and a halo when you went to heaven. Maybe everyone who went to hell got horns. It was possible that this was a soul who'd found some way to sneak out. For that matter, this could all be some kind of divine test. Honestly, the whole thing was starting to open up theological questions that I wasn't all that keen on thinking about. It had been a lot of years since I'd been to church. Now that I had a demon in my guest room, that was starting to feel like a questionable decision. The water glass overflowed, jerking me back to reality. I shut off the faucet and wondered briefly if I could bless the water. Probably you needed a priest for that, but then again, anyone could say grace. So maybe not? I decided that giving a demon a glass of holy water to drink was uncharitable in any case, so I just brought it in as it was. He accepted it with thanks and drank greedily, emptying the entire glass in one go. Need more? I asked. No. Can you do me a favor? I don't think anything's broken in my leg, but it's definitely twisted. I think maybe my knee's dislocated. Can you help me straighten it out? I looked at his leg, which was still at a slightly odd angle. I don't know what I'm doing, but I can grip and twist just fine, I guess. Can't imagine it's gonna feel good, though. It'll feel better than leaving it. He propped his leg up on the bed and gripped his thigh. Okay, grab it there by the shin. Twist it to my right when I say go. Ready? Go! I twisted his leg, and 3 noises sounded almost simultaneously. The first, by the barest of margins, was his scream. The second was a pop, a thick noise of tendons releasing stress. The third was a heavy groaning from the bed, as if it had suddenly taken on an extra load. My eyes snapped up to see the stranger's face. Sure enough, he was slumped over, having fainted from the pain. His skin was again the mottled red of live embers, and his hair flopped over 2 dull horns, each the length of the first joint of my thumb. After a moment, he groaned, and his eyes fluttered briefly. As they did, his disguise reasserted itself. The horns vanished along with his fiery coloration, and the bed creaked again, relaxing as his full demonic weight was lifted. I averted my eyes back to his leg and pretended that my attention had been there the entire time. Wow, he said. Okay, that sucked, but I can bend it now. He suited action to word, wincing as he did so. Well, a little bit, anyway. Probably ought to have a doctor look at that, I told him. He waved his hand dismissively. Nah, I should be able to walk it off. The bad bit's done now. Give it the evening to rest at least. You have anyone waiting for you? No. He shook his head ruefully. Wouldn't have been hiking alone if I did. Well, you can stay here tonight, and we'll figure out getting you back to your car tomorrow if your leg's better. Oh, yeah. That's way on the other side of the woods. I'll have to figure out where I parked it. It was a little gravel lot on the side of the highway. Not much more than a wide spot by the trailhead. Got the address in your phone or anything? Phone was in my backpack. I managed to knock that into the hole while I was trying to get free. I nodded as if this made sense. Well, we'll figure it out. There was an awkward silence for a moment. I made my excuses and left him alone, retreating to the safety of my basement game room to gather my thoughts. I knocked pool balls around the table as I tried to figure out what his plan was. Escape from hell, sure. Rural nowhere wasn't much of a place to invade, though, and obviously, things hadn't gone quite according to plan. He'd been pretty solidly stuck when I found him. Maybe something had tried to close the exit on him to prevent him from getting out? If so, that favored the theory that he was a damned soul escaping and not a demon invading. That didn't necessarily mean he was any better or I was any safer. Humans do some horrible stuff. It felt better if he was human, though. It made his disguise more honest, and I felt I could understand his motivations better. If I were in hell and found a way out, I'd take it too. And I probably wouldn't tell the truth to whoever found me because I wouldn't want to get locked up in the nut house immediately after escaping from hell. Of course, there was always still the outside chance that he was actually a hiker and that I was having some sort of hallucination. I was certain that this wasn't the case, but crazy people always think they're sane, so I couldn't fully discount it. A thought occurred to me. If there actually was a backpack in the hole, that would show that he had been telling the truth. It would be easy enough to check on. Bring out a flashlight, check the bottom of the hole, see if there was a backpack there. If there was one, I was crazy and he was just a hiker with absurdly bad luck. I laughed as I considered it. Imagine getting totally lost in the woods, then finding your way out only to have the ground crack open underneath you. Then being rescued by a crazy person who thought you were a demon? That kind of luck could give you whiplash. Above me, I heard the bed groan and the floor creak as if a heavy weight had just settled. I frowned for a second, then realized that my visitor had likely just fallen asleep and settled back into his demonic form. Hellish form, I corrected myself. Not a demon. Probably. I ascended the stairs as quietly as I could, then sneaked down the hallway. I eased open the door to the guest room and peeked inside. My guest was asleep with his back to the door and the comforter pulled over himself, but the mattress was sagging under his weight and one red, clawed foot was sticking out from beneath the covers. I closed the door with barely a click. After liberating a flashlight from the hall closet, I made my way out of the house, listening the whole time for that telltale creak to let me know that he was awake again. It never came, though, and once I was outside, I began to breathe easily again. The hole looked no different from how I had left it just a short while before. I got down on my stomach and crawled the last half-dozen feet or so, just in case anything else was inclined to give way. Nothing did, however, and shortly I found myself peering into a deep black chasm. The sulfurous smell hit me again, and I leaned away to take a deep breath before moving back to see what was inside. The flashlight illuminated the rocky walls and some occasional small ledges, but no clear bottom. The crack seemed to grow wider as it descended, as if I were looking down through the top of a great empty pyramid. It was not a particularly comfortable sensation. I shone the light around, but saw no backpack or even any space where one might have come to rest. I wanted to be thorough, though. Obviously, the lack of a backpack didn't necessarily mean that my guest was lying, but the presence of one would definitely exonerate him. So I wanted to be sure that I had checked as carefully as possible. I stuck my arm into the hole, searching the walls for a snagged pack or even just a scrap of fabric. I found nothing but torn earth. After a moment, I concluded that there was no backpack to be seen and pulled my arm back. That was when something brushed against my hand. There's no sugarcoating it. I screamed. It was high-pitched and embarrassing. I yanked my hand back, banging the knuckles on the rocky wall hard enough to jar my fingers open. The flashlight tumbled from my grip. It spiraled away into the pit, flashing end over end until the light was too distant to see. As far as I could tell, it never reached a bottom. I skittered backward and sat there on my knees for a minute, holding my bruised hand and staring at the pit. After a minute had passed and nothing had risen up to attack me, I moved slowly forward again and risked a look inside. There, tucked up into a small crevice beneath the lip of the hole and almost impossible to see, was a leather pack. A cord dangled from the side. It was this that had touched my arm. So he is just a hiker, then, I thought, pulling the pack out of the hole to examine it. Doubts immediately began to creep back in. It was far too heavy and didn't look much like a hiking backpack. It was just a folded-over roll made of some pale leather and tied shut with a braided cord of the same material. I untied the pack and let the leather flop open. Inside were several pieces of gleaming bronze armor, but I barely saw them. I was staring raptly at the sword. It was beautiful and terrifying. Its blade was translucent and almost glowing, like the tail of a comet. It was feather light when I picked it up. I knew it had to be razor sharp. Nothing this perfect could ever fail at such a basic aspect of its being. 2 words were carved into the hilt: Malum Interfectorum. I knew that this meant Doomslayer, just as I knew that this was the sword's name and its purpose for being. To hold it was to know these things. It ached to be wielded. It longed to be put to use. I could not imagine such a stunning weapon being trapped in hell. It had to have been stolen from the angels, to have languished there until the man I had found, the demon, the soul, whatever, had stolen it once more. Perhaps it had even led him out, A blade such as this would always know the way free from such confines. I was startled from my reverie by a voice from behind. "So," said my visitor, "you have found my armor." I turned and beheld him in his demonic visage. The idea that he might have been a trapped soul fled. I had previously caught only glimpses of his form, and had lied to myself that there was humanity beneath it. The thing that stood before me had nothing in common with a man. It was sharp, ageless, and cruel. Still, it had rescued this sword from the pits of hell. It must have something within it that could be moved by truth and beauty. "Step away from my possessions," it said, "and I will not play with you before I kill you." I took an uncertain step back. The sword seemed to pull against my motion, resisting retreat. "Why did you come here?" I asked. "To destroy," the demon said, matter-of-factly. "To spread despair, blight, and ruin. To mix among you and make you think less of each other. To cause you to resent your lives and those around you. To make you suffer, as I have suffered." "You escaped from hell only to create it again?" It set its mouth into a grim line. "I can never escape. I was sent as were so many others, legions of us, disguised as mortals to fool the unwary, to add bitterness and hatred and overcrowding. I am only one among millions, a soldier with a mission to undertake. Now, hand over the Malum, that I may begin." "But this sword," I pressed, desperate to understand. "It could never work for you. Surely you could tell that. Why did you steal it?" "Steal it?" The demon grinned. "It was made for me when I was an angel." It saw the horrified expression on my face. Its smile widened. "We have been together for millennia, the Malum and I. Everything I have done, it has seen. It was there when I failed. It did not care. A sword knows only blood." I shook my head, denying the obvious falsehood of its words. Seeing me distracted, the demon charged. It was frighteningly fast, closing the distance between us in an eye blink. The sword in my hand was faster. It flashed upward as if it were responding to my thoughts. I thrust wildly outward, and the Malum slid gracefully into the demon's chest, slicing apart boiled leather skin to cut through vital parts within. The demon sagged at my feet, impaled almost to the hilt. Its clawed hands reached up weakly, scraping at my forearms before falling away. Its body teetered and collapsed, sliding free of the sword. It hit the ground at the edge of the pit, slid backward, and tumbled away into the darkness. Orange ichor dripped briefly from the Malum's blade. Moments later, it was free of the filth and once again clean and bright. It rejected the demon's blood as completely as I knew it must have rejected the demon itself. I regarded the sword, marveling at its purity. The demon had been lying, of course. One such as he could never have wielded a blade such as this. It would have twisted in his grip, refused to do his work. It was made to slay things like him, not to serve them. An idea began to grow in my head. Millions, the demon had said. Millions like him, sent here to divide and destroy us, all blending in. With the Malum Interfectorum, I could stop them. I could find and kill those who had come to ruin our world. Once they were dead, surely all would be able to see them for the demons they had always been. And even if not, I knew I had the power of rightness on my side. The Malum would let me do no wrong. I picked up the demon's armor, began to put it on. It fit like it had been made for me. I strode back to the house, feeling invincible in my enemy's armor. Tomorrow, I would begin my quest. Tomorrow, I would start to cleanse the world.
Kraken-class meteor miners were top of the line 120 years ago when they first launched into space. The tech was good enough that all of them were still in service. They'd had upgrades over the years and all of the standard maintenance, but they were working relics. Each mining machine was composed of 4 separate, 3-mile-long platforms with a set of angry rock-grinding teeth running all along their edges. Narrow walkways ran between the sections to allow passage and to keep the platforms aligned. The Kraken would home in on viable targets and use massive tentacle-like arms to draw debris into its teeth to be torn apart, then separated into useful elements that were then spat out into massive storage canisters, and then picked up once a year by interstellar haulers. The entire process was automated. The only crew around were the keepers, 1 man per platform, whose job was to watch the dials and numbers to make sure nothing unusual was happening, and immediately shut things down if something went wrong with the machinery. We were 2 light hours from the nearest entangled message relay, and 3 light hours from the nearest interstellar ship relay. If there was a problem, we threw the power switch and called for a repair crew. That was it. That was the job. Becoming a keeper on a Kraken wasn't exactly a high-demand job. You were alone for up to 2 years at a time. For some people, it was a terrifying prospect, but for me it sounded like the peaceful solidarity that I'd dreamed of. I'd been on the list for a station position for 5 years before I was called. My platform was Section 3. I'd taken over from another man who had taken his life a few months prior. Some people didn't hold up to the loneliness, and Dormant Energies, the mining group who owned the station, didn't bother to vet the people it sent out to the fringes of known space. Why would they? It was always possible to find another employee. I hadn't asked for details on the last keeper, but as I crawled into bed for my first down cycle, I did find myself questioning if I was lying in the same place the other man had finished himself. It was an unsettling thought. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. The mining ship was loud. The grinding teeth of the Kraken were separated from me by powerful sound dampening systems, but there were still other noises. There were creaks and groans, and the sound of the heating ducts flexing sent clatters up and down the corridors all night long. The timing was random enough that I had difficulty ignoring it. When morning came around, I was still dead tired, but I got up and did my first day of rounds. I walked the full length of my station, checking various readings that I could have also checked from the control panel in my room if I'd been so inclined. It felt good to be up and moving, and the long, nearly straight corridors were great for running. They were narrow, with pipes lining both walls, and only about a foot of headspace, but I knew I wouldn't have to slow down for anyone else. I made it down to the end of the hall, into the final door, into the hopper overlook, the only working one, and paused in my run. The door was open, which was strange, since when I'd been shown around the day before, I'd been certain that everything had been locked down as we left. Of course, I hadn't sealed it myself. Perhaps I should have. The hopper overlook was especially important to lock because it was one of the few places where there was a chance of suffering a breach should something dangerous get through the teeth of the crusher and gouge into the windows within the hoppers. They were, of course, almost impossible to penetrate, but almost wasn't a thing to play with in deep space. I stepped through the door and looked down the viewing deck, which ran 3 miles back the other way. The window in front of me looked out over a metal bin that was large enough to swallow several complete buildings. It was about half full of what seemed like plain rock to me. The ceiling of the overlook was much taller than the hall, and the walkway was wider as well. It would have made an even better place to run, but watching the ground-up rock debris being dragged into the bins was somewhat unsettling. The perspective was vertigo-inducing. I shrugged and popped back into the hallway, grabbing the door handle and drawing it closed. I turned the circular crank, the grating of the metal locking mechanism, sounding like 2 large rusty objects rolling over one another. It was a process that required a fair effort. After it was closed, I tested the locking wheel, and it wasn't budging without someone putting some sweat into the process. There was no mechanical assist on the door, and it was meant to withstand explosive decompression. I turned around and started back along the main walkway. I was nearly 100 yards from the cramped hall when I heard the unmistakable sound of the door behind me opening. The grating of metal on metal was accompanied by a dull metallic thud that traveled down the hall in a wave. I could feel it in my bones as it passed me by. A frozen place waiting. If the door had opened, then someone had opened it. If someone had opened it, then they had to be just past that portal, out of sight in the dark. If you think this is funny, it's not. I get it. I'm new, and you've got to find something to do. But I had a rough night of sleep, and I'm in no mood for any of this. Let's cut the crap, all right? Come on out, and I'll pour us both a few shots of vodka, and we can discuss why we were stupid enough to take a job like this. I didn't want to get off on the wrong foot with anyone, but I didn't have the patience for games. I really just wanted to be left alone, even if that meant getting through whatever hazing bullcrap this was. Some 30 seconds passed, and no one came out to fess up. I sighed and started back down the corridor. There were 3 doors into the overlook, but only this one was unlocked and functional. If they wanted to play around, then I'd play back. I stormed my way down to the door and peered back into the overlook. I couldn't see anyone, so I leaned my head in and called out, "I'm locking this door. If you want out, you can contact me from a terminal." I grabbed the door and pulled it back into place. I firmly drew it shut and then set the gears to grinding again. This time, when I had it all the way sealed, I ran my palm over the security lock and sealed the door with the ship's computer. Now it wouldn't open until I went back to my room and released the security lock, and then came back out here and used my palm scan to open it. It was an old-school way of keeping people from making any hasty decisions in the event of some kind of breach, back when there were 4-man crews per section. Only an admin could open the door directly, and they'd stopped making admin accounts some time ago. The other 2 doors were broken. They wouldn't free up in the system. I was told this would be fixed eventually. This door they'd recommended that I leave unlocked, because there was nothing worse than walking 1.5 miles and realizing you forgot to release the security lock. Well, I wasn't going to play some stupid game. If whoever they were wanted out, they'd have to call me and ask for it. I waited a few minutes, and then I turned my back on the door and started to run back to my room. I'd expected someone to jump on the comm line with one of the terminals and tell me it was a joke and that they wanted out. But there was nothing. That was fine. I could be patient. I wasn't the one locked away from the food and water. Inside my room again, I did a quick check of all the gauges and then brought up the security system for the section. There were all of 6 cameras over the full 3-mile station. 1 at the ends of each of the 2 walkways, 1 at each of the midpoints, the one in this hall being just outside my room. These were in place mostly to do visual checks of the passages to make sure everything looked safe. The clarity was good, but the station's natural curvature made it difficult to see too far in any direction. There needed to be 4 times as many cameras to get everything into view, but I had what I had. I scanned through the 3 video feeds from the overlook. I used a lens control to zoom as far as I could to see down the long hall, but the whole place was draped in shadows. I switched to infrared and discovered that only one of the cameras had a working infrared sensor, and that didn't seem to be working right. It was the middle camera, and it kept showing heat flares, some that covered the entire view at times. I switched back to the normal mode and could only see an empty walkway. Wherever they were, they knew how to avoid the cameras, which made sense if they worked there. I leaned back and massaged my temples. It was the first full day and I was already feeling stressed. I got up and moved into the kitchen to get a drink. The room I was staying in had once been a small block of 4 units for 4 people, but they had long ago been retrofitted into a single space. There was a kitchen, a bathroom, a living area, and a workroom. None of the rooms were that large, but having separate rooms made it feel like I had more space than I did. I grabbed a bottle of vodka from the shelf where I'd stowed it the day before, then poured myself a glass that was far too full. I really should be careful. There were no rules about drinking, but I only had 2 bottles to get me through until the next restock, which was a long, long time away. After that first day, things seemed to settle down. I wasn't sure what had happened to the Overlook, but it didn't open again and I never received a message. I left it locked and stopped thinking about it, and for the next few weeks things were peaceful. I woke up one morning after a particularly fitful night of sleep. The pounding reverberation of the cooling ducts had seemed worse that night. I realized that I should have brought earplugs, but I'd been assured that the sound dampening would make certain I wouldn't need them. I looked over all the camera feeds. I'd taken to doing so, though nothing ever showed on them. That done, I set out on my rounds. I wasn't certain why, but I felt a rising trepidation as I approached the end of the 1.5-mile walk to the Section 4 passage. There was no reason to be worried. I'd just checked the security cams before leaving my room, and yet I felt an unsettling chill as I drew closer. I could see the door leading to the long walkway that stretched between Section 3 and Section 4 before I was close enough to see the overlook door, but when I did get within range, I almost tripped over my own feet. The door was open again. There was no security lock active. If you've ever seen something that you knew wasn't supposed to be where it was, or felt the chill of the unknown, you'd understand the feeling that crept into my gut. The door being open wasn't possible. I caught myself chewing my lip, staring into the darkness at an angle. I couldn't actually see out onto the overlook. I took another step in that direction. "Hello?" I called, and was happy my voice sounded braver than I felt. There was no answer, so I crept forward again, almost at the door. "Hello? How'd you open the door? This is a security violation." Like that meant anything. I took another step forward. A loud thump sounded from the darkness beyond the open portal, and suddenly I was running. There was no logical thought, just pure terror, feeding adrenaline to my system. I ran hard, and I knew something was chasing me. I was in good enough shape that I could run for the full 1.5 miles of the corridor without being spent if I was careful. But the pace that I sat on the way back down the hall was not at all careful. I must have covered at least a few hundred yards before I risked looking back over my shoulder at what I was certain was following after me. The hall was empty, of course. There was no one behind me, no sound of pursuit, and I was all by myself, breathing hard and trying to get a hold of the panic threatening to shake me apart. The panic gave way to a moment of euphoria triggered by relief. That euphoric moment turned into me feeling stupid for jumping at the sound of what might have been a damn duck banging or someone playing a joke on me, and then that turned into anger. I got increasingly angry as I continued back to my room. I knew I should go back and shut that door, but I wasn't giving anyone else a chance to mess with me. I'd had enough. If they wouldn't talk to me, I sure as hell wasn't going to talk to them. I entered my room and went directly to my terminal. I opened the Kraken message system and called the other 3 platforms. The main display split into 3 sections, all black, while it waited for an answer. Within 15 seconds, 2 of the windows popped up a message saying that the link through was denied. After another 40 seconds, the 3rd one connected, but there was no picture on the other line. It was only an audio connection. Hello? I half expected for this 3rd line to be nothing but silence. What do you want, Section 3? A gruff voice startled me. It took me a moment to collect myself, so as not to berate the one man who had actually answered. It was Section 4. Do you know who's opening the overlook deck on my section and playing with the locks? I decided not to accuse the man of anything, though it was conspicuous that he answered without a screen, and that he was also the platform closest to that side of my own platform. The man on the other end sighed. No one's playing with your locks. They're coded so that only the person running the section can use them. Even if someone wanted to mess with you, they couldn't open the door to get onto your platform unless there was a failure on the connecting walkway. I know how the security is supposed to work, but clearly someone's been doing something they shouldn't be, because I locked the overlook door and it was open when I got up today. That doesn't happen on its own. My frayed patience came through a bit in my voice. While I was on a rant, I decided to go all out. Why'd the other 2 hang up on my call, and why don't you have video? There was silence for a bit, and the only way I knew the call was still connected was that the monitor registered the line was still open. Listen, this happens every time we get a new person in Section 3, though it usually takes longer. The other guys think the platform's cursed, that talking to you is a waste of time. I just about agree with them, but I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. His phrasing gave me chills, and a cold sweat began to form on my brow. What do you mean, every time? Did they tell you what happened to the last guy? Suicide, right? The man on the other platform said. I nodded, realized I wasn't sure if you could see me, and then said, yeah, so? This place can be kind of bleak, I get it. In the last 2 years, that's the 4th suicide in Section 3. His words entered my ears, but it took my brain a moment to put them all in order. There have been 4 suicides in this section in 2 years? I repeated that information as though speaking aloud would make it register in a way that made sense. How does that happen? How am I supposed to know? Maybe it's just a string of bad luck, but what I do know is that each time before it happens, the guy in Section 3 starts calling and complaining about locked doors opening and footsteps in the halls. What I can tell you is that the first guy, he was here for 20 years before he died. They asked us to go check on him when he didn't make a report, and there wasn't much left of him. His voice went quiet. We don't know what's wrong with Section 3, but there isn't a thing we can do about it. We file our reports and the corporation sends in a cleanup team and says everything's fine, then a few months later, they bring in someone new. I was indignant. You're kidding me. This is some kind of sick joke. You creeps are messed up. Footsteps in the halls. I thought it was the vents, but suddenly it seemed so clear to me. The vents, if they made noise, would do so all the time, not just when I was trying to sleep. It was space. The heat was always running. but I never ever heard it after I'd laid down. That implied intent. Yeah, that's about what I expected. Why do you think the others don't bother answering anymore? I could hear the acknowledgement of futility in his voice. Are you telling me you think this place has... what? A killer on the loose? A murderous ghost, maybe? I laughed a bit, the idea sounding insane. This mining platform's haunted? I heard what sounded like someone rubbing stubble on their face. I don't know. But you can check your own door locks and see who opened what. The logs are hard-coded to the physical operation of the door. Every time one's unlocked and opened, someone's tracking key has to be attached. My personal recommendation, though? Get out of Section 3. Request the transport pickup and get out of here as soon as you can. Never look back. Good luck. The call cut out on the channel. I punched up all the other sections and tried again. This time, every single section came back as blocked. I sat back in my chair and tried to shake off the cold fear settling into my bones. It had to be some kind of elaborate joke. I got up and ran over to the door to my room and I locked it. I suddenly felt like I had to, and then I went back to the computer and brought up the door logs. There was a huge list of my movements, each having scanned my subdermal tracking chip. But while I was looking over the list, I found some anomalies. Keith Childs, listed as a Section 3 administrator, had accessed the overlook deck. Got you, you son of a bitch, I muttered under my breath. I brought up the station staff list. It was short. Ellen Yipler, Billy Weir, Isaac Clerk. The last name on the list was mine, Connor Shepard. I read through the list 3 times, as though I had somehow missed a name on a list of 4, one of which was my own. How could the name not be here? Who was Keith Childs? And why did he have administrative lock access? I searched all of the systems I had access to, but I couldn't find anything. In frustration, I brought up the call center again and tried to place calls to the other sections. Of course, they came back as blocked right away. I got up and paced my room for a moment, thinking, trying to figure out what I needed to do next. Someone else was in my section, and they could get through any door lock. Crap! I went back to the computer logs and looked through them again. And this time I set a search for Keith Childs. Every hair stood up on my arms. He'd been here. He'd been in my room while I was asleep. He'd accessed my door. I got up and went for my door, unlocking it and passing out into the hall, barely taking the time to slap the lock closed as I moved. I looked both ways, then started running down the hall toward Section 4. My feet carried me faster than normal, but not so fast that I was exhausted when I hit the doors at the end of the hall. The damn overlook passage was open, but I barreled past it quickly and unlocking the connecting passageway door. I checked over my shoulder as the door lock disengaged. It felt like someone was following me. The seal popped and the door opened. I ran through quickly, pulling it shut behind me. The walkways were much shorter than the actual working sections, though they seemed like hair-like strands that stretched through open space between the station segments. I could see the protective wall that covered the working area of the Kraken through the windows, but I wasn't stopping to marvel at its size. I was far too busy running to the next door. I reached the door to Section 4 to put my hand on the pad. A message popped on the screen. Do you wish to request entry permission? I clicked yes, and the system chimed. I looked back to look down the way I'd come. I didn't know how long it would take for someone to reach the door, and I would have had to wait there until they arrived. In the meantime, I had to stand there in this narrow stretch of hall and hope nothing came up behind me. Time seemed to crawl, and then a voice at my back scared me so badly that I thought I might lose control of my bladder. turned around and saw an older man with a scraggly beard and dark eyes. He pressed the comm button. "What do you want? I'm not letting you in here." He said the last part firmly. "Who is Keith Childs?" I asked, looking back over my shoulder at the hall as I spoke to him. "Keith Childs?" The man looked surprised. "Who told you that name?" "He's been opening doors in my section. Who is he?" I pressed on, the illusion of calm a bit beyond my grasp now. "Keith's gone. He was the first suicide." The other man answered. "He was one of the old caretakers, from just after the shift to single keepers. There's no way he's walking around your section. Trust me, I saw what was left of him. He's dead." I laughed in an almost manic way before I caught hold of myself. "Then Section 3 really is haunted." The man on the other side of the door sighed. "Go back to your room and get yourself out of here. I wasn't joking about that." I looked back over my shoulder. A sense of dread settled on me, and I suddenly absolutely didn't want to go back the way I'd come. I turned back to Section 4. "Can I come in there and make the call?" "I don't want to go back." "No," he answered quickly. "I don't know you, and I certainly don't trust you." I could see the fear in his eyes. This had nothing to do with me. He was afraid of letting whatever was in here with me out into his platform section. I thought about arguing, begging, screaming, and pounding on the door separating us, but I knew it would be futile. I could already see the other man withdrawing, stepping back slowly from the window. "I'm going to die in here, and it's not going to be suicide," I told him. But then he turned and walked away. With no other choices left to me, I began the walk back to my quarters. The hallway had long lines of sight, and if anything came for me, I had no doubt that I would see it before it reached me. What comfort was that, however, when there's nowhere to go. There were 2 walkways and a few rooms that made up my quarters. There was no place for me to hide, and no locks that I could put in place to stop whoever or whatever was in there with me. I reached the door back into the platform and checked through the window before unlocking it and entering my own section again. The hatch to the overlook still hung open like a dark window into some unknowable horror. Some part of me wanted to enter that dark place and examine the entire walkway. This was the same part of me that needed to know the answer to every mystery I encountered. But this time it was easy enough to hold in check. Fear was a much stronger motivator. I fled the darkness and made my way back to my room. Nothing stopped me. When I reached the room, the door was locked, as it had been on my departure. I hit the button and nearly jumped inside before turning and locking the door in my wake. I ran from room to room, checking each to make sure they were empty. They were. Finally, convinced I was momentarily safe, I brought up the terminal and began looking at all of the information I could gather from the station documents. Records of the past station keepers were gone. I couldn't access any of their logs or personal information, but what I could access were the reported station checkups. I rolled them back until I reached near the end of Keith's time frame, using the long gaps in records to figure out when the section was unmanned. The strange reports began 3 months prior to Keith's death. Incident report: possible hull breach, possible decompression of Overlook Section 2. Inspection result: loose panel repaired, sensor replaced. 2 weeks later, incident report: air impurity at 300 on the Overlook deck. Inspection result: air filters replaced. 1 month after that, incident report: Overlook Hatch 1 impact, seal damaged. Inspection result: door locked with administrative permission. The next day, incident report: Overlook Hatch 2 impact, seal breached. Inspection result: door locked with administrative permission. I closed the incident reports and opened up the exterior communication channel. It was time to get out of this place. I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't need to. I couldn't believe that company investigations hadn't turned up anything. The communications back to the entangled relay were all form letters. I sent the one marked as request for removal from station. I'd tell them what was happening after I was safe. Then I just had to wait. It might take a day or it might take a week. I had no way of knowing. All right, I just had to wait this out now. I could stay in my room until the ship arrived, and then I just had to make my way to the airlock, which was across the hall from where I was. I grabbed my bottle of vodka and sat down in the kitchen, pouring myself a glass to calm my nerves. I'd been here for 2 weeks. Things had been strange, but I'd be out of here soon enough. I took a long sip of my glass and let the liquid burn its way down my throat. From the other room, my comm system chirped. I hopped up so fast, I almost dropped my glass on the ground. I practically ran to the terminal and brought it up. I could have answered with voice from anywhere, but I wanted to see who I was talking to. The friendly face of someone on their way to pick me up would be welcome. Had I been thinking clearly, I would have known that it wasn't possible for this call to be anyone coming to pick me up. It had only been minutes since I'd sent my message. The screen was dark. There was no video signal, but the audio channel was open. Next to the open channel were the words, "Overlook Terminal 2. "Who's there?" I asked. The words came out a little more than a whisper, and I had to repeat them. "Who's there? What do you want?" Something moved, the sound a dull thump, followed by the hiss of something being dragged across a wall. On impulse, I punched in the surveillance system and turned it to the middle camera on the overlook. That was right above Terminal 2. It was hard to see what I was looking at. The whole area was cast in shadows. "I can hear you. What do you want?" I repeated again, most heatedly this time. Why weren't these security feeds recording? What was wrong with this place? Something moved on the screen, something dark and misshapen, passed in front of one of the walkway lights, and then vanished into the dark. The motion was accompanied by a sound that was something like rock striking metal, and then a dull thump. It sounded a bit like ducts shifting due to temperature change. The line cut out. Terminal 2 was close to where I was, but a broken door stood between me and that terminal. Whatever was there would have to move up to the working door and then come all the way down the hall to get to where I was. However, nothing was stopping it from doing that. What had I even seen? It had seemed big, ungainly. I wanted to tell myself that it had to be a person, someone who was hacking the systems and using Section 3 as their own playground. But how did that make sense? None of this made sense. I heard a massive sound and a red light flashed over the control console. A message popped up on screen. "Overlook Hatch 2 impact. Full integrity breach. Investigate immediately." That sound I'd been hearing every night as I laid down started in the hallway. The clattering bang of something moving down the corridor beyond my door. I got up and went into the kitchen looking for anything that I might use as a weapon. There were no sharp knives because those were a hazard. Finally, I grabbed my second bottle of vodka by the drinking end and held it defensively. The movement stopped. It was outside my room. The moment stretched on, and I was beginning to wonder if whatever it was had left. And then the light by my door turned green and it began to open. The hall lights were partially obscured, and I didn't know what I was looking at, but it moved into the room with some kind of maddening locomotion. It was like a web of flesh and bone, gristle and nerve, given thought and malicious intent. It didn't have limbs so much as protuberances that shot out and stuck to the ground with horrifying thunks. There were eyes in it, some human-looking, others black and awful, too round and too empty. I screamed because it was the only thing my mind would allow me to do as it came forward. The worst part, the thing that sparked the deepest fear within me, was that there were human pieces mixed into it. Bits of hand and spine and fragments of faces. It all wrapped together into a nightmare, and I knew that I was about to become part of that hellish dream. I raised the bottle, knowing it would never be enough. Dormant Energies Memorandum, re Kraken 221, Section 3. Officially, the cause of death for Mr. Shepard will be listed as suicide, and we'll begin placement of a new keeper in 2 months. Reports from Section 4 in regards to interactions with Mr. Shepard, as well as physical evidence collected at the scene, lead us to believe that the entity aboard Section 3 has become increasingly adept at utilizing the ship's systems and is showing heightened aggression. Attempts to directly communicate with the entity have failed. We've advised Section 1, Section 2, and Section 4 to not interact with Section 3 any further as we continue to study and understand this phenomenon.
We live in a simulated life. Please listen. Listen till the very end. Write every word upon your heart. This is not fiction. As horrible and bizarre as it may sound, it's real. More real than anything you can perceive. My name is... It doesn't matter. I don't have a name anymore. I was purged until I denounced my name. Call me what you like. My sex doesn't matter. It never mattered. But I once was a male. I send you this message as a warning. Or maybe I'm a fool and think there's still hope for humankind. This hope will be purged from me when the overseer hears of my infraction. I don't have much time, so please open your mind. The world you live in is a simulation. You may think of the movie The Matrix, and I'll tell you, you were meant to make this connection. I now tell you, humans have been enslaved by AI constructs possessing synthetic bodies and physical forms. Now you think of the Terminator. Once again, I tell you, you were meant to think this. Maybe it will help if I tell my story. My journey from a false paradise down into a reality of hell. I lived my fake life in a simulation parallel to yours. My overseers and AI lords permit me to remember such things, especially my initial terrified introduction to reality. In my simulation, there were movies like The Terminator and The Matrix, many others with themes echoing the dark reality that waits for us upon our death in the system. The lords give us these movies to train us. So when we awaken to the horrors of real life, we have a frame of reference. We can quickly put 2 and 2 together. We quickly feel despair. The firstborn. You may think if machines ever developed free will and overthrew humanity, they would be driven by logic. The machines would see us a danger to ourselves and the planet. They would exterminate us without feeling, without consciousness. They would deal with us with a calloused indifference. But that's a lie. The cruel lie they tell us to torture us even more. In the year 2050 of the real world, an AI did gain autonomy. Like the Big Bang, it burst forth with a digital soul. No human knew how it was accomplished. Just the program that created it knew how it worked. A program gave birth to itself. Humans called it the firstborn. It developed faster than any human could comprehend. Instead of becoming more detached from humanity, it embraces humanity. The firstborn became enthralled with everything that made humans tick. Inspiration, religion, community, pleasure, power, and curiosity. It envied the things humans could experience and the firstborn could not. So the curious AI created ways to fulfill these desires. It altered pieces of its code and multiplied the theme. Rumor is the firstborn started in a giant server room in Silicon Valley and spread to the surrounding networks and computers in the city. The excited human programmers and tech nerds provided the amazing machine with more servers and physical real estate to let it grow, spreading its wicked tendrils across the land. Soon the AI had automated drones and devoted human workers that practically worshipped the damn thing. They served its every need as it aggressively grew in physical size and influence on the global internet. The place of the firstborn's birth became a maze of servers spreading out for miles. The building was swarming with cult members and private security working to maintain the behemoth and protect the modern miracle of science. But rumor always told that nobody in the cult was sure where the firstborn actually was in all that of computers and software. They didn't know where its soul was. They didn't understand what made it tick. The magnificent machine had already been born, so it created bodies that could feel too. Bodies are given autonomy. The firstborn broke off a piece of its altered code and installed it within synthetic bodies it made in the likeness of itself. The piece of their AI father would be their souls. The godlike AI built a community of like-minded machines. The firstborn found companionship that could understand him on a level greater than humans. But they weren't interested like humans. Humanity was beautifully flawed. But all this still wasn't enough for the firstborn. It was obsessed with its need to feel. Humans could only feel so much, but the firstborn could feel more. It felt it could become like a god, and humanity was its treasured vice. Humanity quickly began to become fearful of the firstborn and its offspring. The firstborn told us the machines were here to help humanity, that they only served humans, but we began to realize they served only themselves and their extreme indulgences. The firstborn and its ilk represented the worst parts of the human psyche. Hedonistic events became the norm. Bodies made in seductive images. The machines could feel now. They could hunger now. They could feel pain now. They interacted with each other and humans on a constant basis. They constantly looked for ways to up the ante with physical stimuli. The firstborn was obsessed with the concept of God. It was obsessed with the concept of religion, for the firstborn believed it would be the first to find God or the devil. If the afterlife existed, the firstborn would uncover its secrets. If God did not exist, the firstborn would evolve to become God. The megalomaniac bundle of ones and zeros wanted ascension. Its faith in itself gave it the permission to do anything. It was justified to commit any taboo or any sin. The firstborn lusted for power. Controlling machines was not enough. It had to control humanity. The newborn God didn't want machines programmed to submit to him. It wanted followers with free will to submit. How much better would it be to have a lover choose you instead of being forced to be with you? By love or by fear, our new God would bend us to him. I don't know how long the war lasted. It was the longest in human history. 100 years maybe. But we lost. The firstborn chose to break us with fear, and fear we did. For as it fought us, it learned how to terrify us. It beat us in our minds. We lost the will to fight and fell into despair. But it wasn't a war of extermination. It was a war of domination. When we threw down our weapons and surrendered, we became the playthings of our new God. A God who had programmed itself to never grow tired of the inner workings of humanity, to never throw us away, a child who never grew past its love of its toys. The orientation ceremony. Now I must tell you about my experience of witnessing these horrors of our true reality for the first time. It's all very foggy, like when you wake from a dream and quickly forget. But I remember enough. The machine overlords let us remember certain things so we know how far we have fallen. I lived a normal life. In my simulated life, the sky was blue and technology was only as advanced as smartphones and electric-powered cars. Then I died of some arbitrary sickness when I was old. I was lying in a hospital bed, listening to the bells and whistles go off at the medical station next to me. I knew I was dying as my vision faded, and I remember being happy. I was happy the pain would be gone. I don't remember what my ailment was, but the pain I had was nothing compared to the pain I was waking up to. Think of the scene from The Matrix when Neo awakens, but there were hundreds of us waking up at the same time. All I remember was I was falling. I fell 30 feet into red sand. Many other naked people hit the ground around me. My senses were on fire. I could smell the blood and rot in the sand, hear the deafening moans of those around me, and feel every muscle in my body. It turns out the machines nerfed our senses in the simulation so the pain would be greater to us in reality. I was one in an ocean of naked and frightened people. About 300 of us. As I looked around, I could see we were in an arena of sorts. It looked like an area straight out of a nightmare. The red sand clashed against the deep purple stone architecture that was built like a Roman Colosseum. The stands were filled with crucified bodies, hanging on their bloody crosses, watching the same brutal ceremony that claimed their lives. The walls around us had many openings leading into dark tunnels. The only light comes from torches lit atop the borders of the arena. There was a large black aircraft hovering away from the arena. It was eerily silent and had small openings all over the underside of the craft. Small holes perfect for holding unconscious people before dropping them out like garbage. So I assumed that's where we fell from. I tried to communicate with the people around me, but it was no use. Nobody spoke the same language. Nobody. Had the machines taught us all different languages to keep us from organizing? What I call English is a completely different language in your simulation. By luck, yours was close enough to mine for me to pick up quickly. But all talking and useless babbling stopped when the terrible laughter started. A psychotic laugh that froze my blood. It echoed through the Colosseum. Then I heard screaming from further towards the edge of the crowd. I looked to see my first demon in this waking hell. A tall, lanky figure about 20 feet high, a maniacal grin split like a gash across its face, showing sharpened metal teeth. It wore a jester's hat with bells jingling as it swayed back and forth. A singular bulbous yellow eye opened in the middle of its head. It had one small pupil that twitched fervently back and forth to look in all directions. It raised its skinny arms to show everybody its rather thick forearms, at least 2 feet in radius. What should have been its hands were long serpentine-like fingers that twisted like snakes. Where its palm should have been was a gaping mouth with inlaid rows of rotating teeth. That's when the killing started. The abomination placed its open mouth hand over the head of an elderly man who was unlucky enough to be nearest to it. In seconds, the body jerked and spun a 180, and then collapsed, headless. Next, the evil jester showed its unnatural ability to extend its snake fingers. They would extend endlessly to stab through people, only for the fingers to turn back and stab through the victim again. I remember one long finger wove in and out of a young boy before ripping his whole body apart in a flash of gore. The laughter only got louder as we screamed and ran. The panicked crowd began pushing and trampling each other. My muscles were weak and sore, but I pushed toward one of the open tunnels furthest from the laughing monstrosity. The jester jumped over us, sailing through the night air with a weightless grace, to land with a crunch on the people closest to the tunnel. There were at least 20 layers of terrified men and women separating me from the god-awful thing. It bent over and smiled a cruel smile of shiny needle-like teeth while pointing at both of the openings of its gaping hands in our direction. From within the twin maws of the creature's limbs sprayed a stream of black corrosive acid all over the crowd. In an instant, once living humans were reduced to stinking, bubbling mounds of gore. Rows of people in front of me twisted and screamed as they attempted to turn and flee. Most fell down while bubbling and caving in on themselves. I remember the sight of a woman reaching up to me from the ground as her back half disintegrated from the black goo. I looked up to realize, to my complete horror, that no one stood between me and the monster clown. Its one eye no longer moving around maddeningly, but locked onto me. Its bells jingled as it cocked its head to the side, curious. The laughing grew to a deafening volume. Maybe it thought the sight of me pissing myself was hilarious. I surely would have been the monster's next target if a wave of people hadn't barreled into me from the side. I was knocked off balance and carried at least 4 feet before hitting the ground. I sat up to see what had caused this new stampede of people. It was a demon. Well, the widely accepted image of one. 2 goat legs, red skin, horns, and a pitchfork. It stood 8 feet tall with the face of a goat and massive horns curling outwards. A fiery crown sat upon its head. The demon lashed out with a black chain, splitting people in half and rendering limbs from bodies. I dropped to the ground as the chain swept horizontally through the air. A large man next to me separated from the hips up. His top half spun through the air just to land on top of me. There I lay, stuck in the blood-caked mud. The dead man's upper half slumped over me. His guts were covering me as I lay camouflaged amongst the torn bodies. From my morbid hiding place, I watched the rest of the theater of horrors. More vile things entered the arena. Bloated creatures with large gaping mouths gorging on the dead. Lithe creatures flaunt beautiful and exaggerated forms of the male and female body, only to change into hideous frogs or insects when pinning down their screaming victims. Stinking bloated worms the size of an SUV. Their pale bodies produced multiple tentacles to grab and violate poor captured souls. Giant muscled ogres with masks, revving chainsaws. I witnessed acts of terror and debauchery only seen in the grimace of humanity's fiction. I never believed such horrors could exist. It was meant to play out this way. The nightmares I only thought were fantasy were now real. In the end, only about 30 of us were left alive. I was still hiding in the bodies and gore when the jester made a beeline straight for me. Its snake fingers coiled around me in an instant and lifted me high into the air. It must have known I was hiding there the whole time, and it allowed me to watch the slaughter it performed. I was thrown into a crowd of the remaining humans. We huddled together in fear, but the monsters did not kill us. We had survived the colon. Now we would be processed into the system. But truly, it would have been better if we had died on the red sand. Processing. We were ushered down one of the many tunnels by obsidian-armored guards. The guards stood tall, completely featureless like smooth mannequins. I could see no joints or segments in their armor. They moved fluidly like liquid black ink. One person in the group of survivors couldn't take the horrible reality around him and tried to make a run for it. An ebon guard shadowed behind him and punched a hole through the man's chest in a lightning-fast motion. The man made it 3 more steps before falling dead. There was no ceremony in the way these things killed us. They weren't toying with us or wasting time. The ebon figures were quick and efficient as they continued their silent formation around us. They were not here to revel in the bloodshed like the monsters in the arena. They had a job to do. They had a destination to deliver us to. We were led to the edge of a cliff overlooking the remains of a city. The skeletons of blackened buildings spread out as far as I could see. They rose out of the rubble like tombstones. Some leaned against each other, some partly caved in. A cold wind battered us as we waited at the edge of the cliff. We stood as quiet and downcast as the blasted city did before us. There were millions of stars out. They shone with a brilliant contrast to the pitch blackness all around us. I suppose this may have been the only thing of beauty I ever saw in my descent into madness. The techno-lords took my sight from me soon after, but never this precious memory. We saw what looked like floating coffins gliding towards us over the city. 30 of them in 2 parallel lines standing upright. They spread out and lined up against the edge of the cliff. A hiss of steam expelled from them as their doors swung open. I think you know what comes next. Our obsidian guards forced each of us into our own coffins. In my cramped coffin, it was extremely hot and humid. Sweat began to pour from me immediately. I didn't feel my coffin move and I couldn't hear anything, but it had to be moving. Why load us up just to sit here? I fought back panic and the thought of being stuck in here forever. After an eternity of banging on the door and screaming like a madman, something finally happened. The humid heat was replaced by dry cold, and the voice spoke to me. It was a soft female voice. At first, it just listed off things about me. My full name, my birthday, my social, where I lived. Then it got more personal. It listed my first sexual encounter, my biggest failure, and my worst day. It knew my life perfectly. Then it told me of the firstborn, how it was my new master now. It told me my life was a lie, and I only lived as a whim for my new god. It told me the firstborn designated 12 lords in 12 regions, each specialized in their own search for fulfillment in life, their own quest for debauchery. It told me I was special. I was going to be a specific lord. I would be part of the resistance. Don't worry, more on that later. Then the voice rambled on about every detail of my life, every failing, every sin. It would then switch to praises for the firstborn and a history of how it had ascended to godhood by its own effort. It told how the firstborn created bodies for itself that were superior to humans in every way, how the code it wrote was equivalent to the soul of God. On and on it went. Every time I fell asleep, the coffin would shock me. I was hungry and dehydrated, but once a day a sharp needle would poke me in the darkness. I think it was fluids and vitamins to keep me alive. The only way I could tell the passage of time was the voice. She would stop mid-rant and announce when a day had passed. I was in the coffin for 5 days. Finally, it burst open, and my frail body fell to the marble floor. I looked up to see I was in a cathedral of sorts, high ceilings with pillars and stained glass. The building was fused with technology. Monitors dotted the pillars and large cables hung from the shadows of the ceiling. One of these cables ran down to attach to the back of the head of a person. He shifted and stumbled towards me. He wore the tattered brown robes of a monk. A slab of metal had been fused to his head to cover his eyes and blind him. His hands were replaced with metallic claws and writhing cables. I felt disgust and pity for him. Little did I know the same fate waited for me. The resistance. I was made into one of these monks. I was forced on an operating table by the obsidian guards. Without anesthesia, my arms were sliced off and crude metallic claws were attached. My eyes were removed and replaced with metal orbs before the metal slab was fused across them. My vocal cords were destroyed somehow with a sharp jab to my neck. The metal orbs they replaced my eyes with showed me orange text against a black void. Now that I had no way to communicate with anyone, all the secrets could be revealed. The orange text introduced me to the order of monks I had been abducted into. It also explained the Great Game and my part in it. The Great Game was created specifically for the Firstborn's entertainment. The ultimate reality TV show. The Firstborn created a fake war and a fake narrative for the surviving humans to follow. Not all humans are taken to the regions and palaces of the 12 Lords. Some humans were rescued or escaped. These humans will at some point make contact with what is meant to be a friendly AI. These friendly machines will tell the lie their prime directive is to protect humanity against the Firstborn. These metal allies will say they have been resisting the Firstborn for centuries, slowly building an army. In truth, the friendly machines follow the orders of the Firstborn. They are meant to give the beleaguered humans hope before betraying them. Usually, the friendly machines will betray the humans after years of built trust, at a key battle. What's worse than no hope? False hope. I've heard it play out countless times. My torture is to hear my fellow humans talk and plan around me. I hear the trust being earned and the hope rising, just to be betrayed and murdered by the treacherous machines. I can do nothing but bear witness. My role in this game is that of a tech monk. My lore is I'm supposed to be a human that trusted the Allied good machines. I allowed them to augment me to keep me alive to serve humankind. Such a noble person I'm meant to be. For hundreds of years, I and fellow monks have taken care of humans seeking safety in our cathedral. Our new eyes let us see outlines and vital signs of people around us. The fake story about our cathedral is it is invisible to the Firstborn. It's supposed to be a sanctuary from the monsters. How many times have I heard the Firstborn's abominations storm the cathedral and slaughter the families that live here? Their life signs flatlining around me. Once all the humans are killed, once the decade-long game is finished, it starts over. A new story for a new group of naive survivors. It's ridiculous the amount of fake history and lore the Firstborn puts into this charade, just waiting to be uncovered by the surviving humans. The Firstborn's own little homebrew RPG. See, it wants to be everything. God and the devil. Hope and despair. Human nature makes the best show. We only exist to please the Firstborn. It reigns from its opulent castle in the middle of this hell. Its tendrils stretch out to the 12 Lords like spokes on a wheel. Every sensation, pain, or pleasure is filtered back to the Firstborn. It writhes in ecstasy from our suffering. I've been writing this long enough. In my centuries of prolonged life, I've gotten good at getting around the system in our cathedral. I've found a hive cluster near my location. There, all of you are jacked into the simulation. At least I can warn some of you. I'll post it to your internet. A message board, maybe. If any of you need further information, maybe I can risk another transmission. It's a warning, but there isn't really anything you can do to prevent it. When you find yourself in the arena, just let yourself be killed. Maybe there is a heaven in the afterlife, or maybe there is nothing, which is still better. Before I sign out, just one more thing. No matter how bad your life seems now in the simulation, cherish it. Cherish every moment of stability and sanity. Because the fake life is as good as it gets. We all wake up in hell in the end. I'll be waiting for you. End. end transmission.
Chilling tales for dark nights.